I'll give it a quick second for everybody to come in, but at the for the stream today, we have two topics. The first topic is the data mining project, which I have been working on a lot in the previous week, and the second topic is actually fantasy football. So if that's what you're interested in, stick around. If you're not interested in fantasy football, but you just want to know what it is, that's what I'm kind of going for. It's not really a talk that is specific towards people that play fantasy football, but more of a talk that is towards people that don't know what it is at all. So I'm sure if you do know what fantasy football is, you'll be able to pipe in the chat and help me out with the explanation, or possibly ask some questions that I might not have covered. But for now, that's the plan. So I'm just going to get straight into it. So first off, I've been working a lot on the data mining project. And while I'm talking here, I'm going to get a paint window set up. The data mining project, I'll just do a brief overview, but I have been talking about it a lot. It's basically the idea of taking my deep learning algorithm, deep learning artificial intelligence, that's a neural network, that's a lot of words, but if you've seen my previous videos, you might have an idea of what those mean. And I am adjusting the format of it so that it can take in data and attempt to create an approximate equation that will spit out an answer for a specific variable. So what I mean is if the answer was 6 and it had all of the input variables, it would figure out how the data got from the input variables to the output. And so that's the goal. And so the good news is I have everything coded. The bad news is at the moment I'm still in debug phase. So the debug phase, if you have ever tried coding anything, it's the most tedious and probably the most stress-inducing part of coding, because what happens is you get an error and you probably don't know where that error is coming from, and usually it's not what you're thinking. So what's happening is I'm having to go through the code that I've written previously, which I did actually code a little bit more meticulously than usual. I coded each individual part in a different file, tested it, and made sure that it worked by itself, and then implemented it into the main code that I was writing for this project. And so I went through, I was satisfied with how things were working on their own, and when I added everything together and tried to make them work and translate to each other, there were some problems, so I am working on those, and I'm sure that at least in the next week I will have this attempting its first run at an equation. I'm thinking that as opposed to immediately jumping into the big equation that I've talked about in the past, which would be the long, huge fraction that has a bunch of different square roots and various numbers and operators, I'm probably going to make a relatively simple equation and see if it can handle that first, because this will allow me to more easily debug things, especially if the actual learning process is a little bit faster. So I'll be able to see what long-term problems might occur, as opposed to actually waiting the full time it would take to run a AI. So the big things that have happened is that I did strip the AI down a lot. It is no longer the intuitive genetic process. It is just purely genetic, but with deep learning. So I want to see if this can handle the process on its own, because each generation should be a little bit faster with this style. If this isn't enough, or perhaps I believe that there is improvements to be made, I have two things that I can do. I can re-implement the intuitive part, which would be a little bit complicated, but pretty much every aspect of this project has been complicated due to the fractal nature, which I explained in the Wednesday stream. I'll put a link to that for the people that are watching this not live. But basically everything that I did had to be recursive, or double recursive in some places. So that's what I've been working with, but I wanted to kind of just get a a prototype, if anything, just to see that I'm heading in the right direction. So this is common practice when you're creating something, is to create a Mach 1 and then make improvements upon there, because if you can actually see how things are working, then perhaps you'll get insight on how you can improve them, as opposed to just sitting at the drawing board and attempting to make the perfect design right off the bat, which I don't think anyone can do. So that the first one is to re-implement the intuitive nature of it, and the second improvement is to add in a new second gear, because previously I had the optimizer in for the ball drop, and although at first I thought that wasn't working, and it actually did end up working, it was just really inefficient. Like I said, it was really inefficient. So what would happen is the optimizer would, if the program was stuck on any particular level of attempting to reach the highest score, it would look at the program it had and see if the if statements could be rearranged so that they didn't step over each other as much. And so it was a smart idea, but the problem was the way I implemented it wasn't very efficient. So what I did was I just took that out. But the second gear that I want to implement for this current project is actually it's actually to somewhat optimize the coefficients that it's creating. So what can happen in the deep learning process is that it can create it can just create constants. So the difference between a constant and a variable, as you may be able to guess from the names of them, a variable can change, a constant is just a number. And so these constants can become coefficients if they are multiplied by a variable, then they're coefficients of the variable. But what will happen is, in the equation that I've written, there are some coefficients, and so but I would imagine in a normal equation there will be coefficients, so the variables will have to be multiplied by some sort of factor to get their true weight and importance towards the equation. And so what I'm thinking will be able to happen for the second gear is that these coefficients can be tweaked like slightly, and then even smaller and smaller and smaller, and get the perfect number or get close to it perhaps. So I'm thinking that once it hits some tolerance for correctness, then perhaps it has the right answer. It just needs to be optimized. And so that's the idea of the second gear. Is the second gear is what's going to kick in after the deep learning process has gotten through the brute force of figuring out the format of the equation. Because the format is the important part. And then it will get the right shape of a equation through this, I believe, 9-dimensional space that it's creating an equation for. But at least for the equation that I'm putting up to it, I can imagine that in a normal data mining process there could be millions of input variables, but that's way in the future. So that's the idea of the second gear, and so these are things I've been thinking about implementing in the future. And but what I want to do is I want to get this current program running. So that's my goal for the next week. As you will have heard from previous streams, my current school schedule allots me about 3 hours where I'm stuck on campus, and I just sit in the engineering building at UCF and code for 3 hours. So I've been getting pretty good progress done. But that's pretty much what's happened with the data mining process. I don't want to drag on too long with this section, because I do have another section that I want to get to. That is the talk about fantasy football. So I'm going to play a quick ad here, and then we'll move on to the section that I have previously discussed.